The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Avalon Palace as Queen Isabella hurried through the corridors, her silk gown rustling with each urgent step. Today was supposed to be perfect. Prince Alexander, her eldest son and heir to the throne, was turning 16, a milestone that would mark his official entry into royal duties. But nothing was going according to plan. "Your Majesty," called Lady Margaret, her chief lady-in-waiting, struggling to keep pace. "The caterers have arrived, but they're saying the main kitchen is flooded." Apparently, a pipe burst during the night. Isabella stopped abruptly, her emerald eyes flashing with frustration. Flooded? On today of all days? She pressed her fingers to her temples, feeling the familiar throb of a stress headache beginning to form. "What about the ballroom decorations?" "That's another problem, ma'am. The decorating crew hasn't shown up. Their van broke down on the highway, and they won't be here for at least 3 hours." The Queen closed her eyes for a moment, trying to compose herself. This birthday party wasn't just a family celebration. It was a carefully orchestrated political event. Foreign dignitaries, noble families from across the realm, and members of parliament would all be attending. The press would scrutinize every detail, looking for any sign of weakness or incompetence in the royal household. "Where is King Edward?" Isabella asked, though she already suspected the answer. Lady Margaret's expression grew uncomfortable. "His Majesty left early this morning for the annual fishing tournament. He said he would return in time for the evening festivities." Isabella felt her jaw tighten. Edward had a remarkable talent for disappearing whenever family responsibilities became demanding. While she understood his need for personal time, his absence today felt like a betrayal. Alexander's 16th birthday was arguably one of the most important days in their son's life, and his father had chosen to spend it casting lines into the royal lake. As they walked toward the great dining hall, Isabella's mind raced through possible solutions. She had managed countless state dinners, diplomatic crises, and public scandals. Surely she could handle one birthday party, even with these setbacks. "Your Majesty." A young page came running down the corridor, his face flushed with exertion. "Prince Alexander is asking for you. He's in his chambers, and he seems quite upset." Isabella's heart sank. Alexander had been looking forward to this day for months, talking endlessly about the traditions he would finally be old enough to participate in. He had memorized the guest list, practiced his formal speeches, and even helped choose the menu. If he was upset now, it could only mean he had discovered the chaos brewing behind the scenes. She found her son standing by his bedroom window, still in his pajamas despite the late morning hour. His dark hair was disheveled, and his shoulders were slumped in defeat. At 16, Alexander was already showing signs of the tall, commanding presence he would possess as king, but today, he looked like the vulnerable boy he still was. "Alexander, darling," Isabella said softly, approaching him carefully. "Why aren't you getting dressed? The guests will begin arriving in just a few hours." He turned to face her, his blue eyes filled with disappointment. "I heard the servants talking, Mother. The party is ruined, isn't it? The kitchen is destroyed. There are no decorations. And Father didn't even care enough to stay for my birthday." Isabella's heart ached seeing her son's pain. She sat down on the edge of his bed and patted the space beside her. Alexander reluctantly joined her, his usual composure cracking. "I know this seems overwhelming right now," she began, choosing her words carefully. "But challenges like these are exactly what you'll face as king someday. The question isn't whether problems will arise, it's how we choose to handle them." "But this was supposed to be special," Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You and Father have been planning this for months. All the important people are coming." Isabella reached out and took her son's hands in hers. They were larger now than she remembered, no longer the small fingers that had once grasped her dress when he was afraid. "They'll think they're witnessing something far more valuable than a perfect party. They'll see resilience, creativity, and the true character of their future king." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Princess Charlotte, Alexander's 13-year-old sister, peeked her head into the room. Her auburn curls were tied back in a messy ponytail, and her riding clothes were covered in hay. "Mother," "Alexander, you need to come see what's happening in the courtyard," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "The whole palace staff has gathered, and they're doing something amazing." Curious, despite their worries, Isabella and Alexander followed Charlotte to the window that overlooked the main courtyard. Below them, dozens of palace staff members were working together in organized chaos. The gardeners had brought in potted flowers and topiary trees, creating an impromptu outdoor dining area. The kitchen staff, led by Chef Henri, had set up temporary cooking stations using portable burners and camp equipment. Even the stable hands were helping, stringing lights between the ancient oak trees. "They heard about the problems," Charlotte explained, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "Sarah from the kitchen told me they all got together this morning and decided to create an outdoor celebration instead. They said no flood was going to ruin Prince Alexander's birthday on their watch." Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. In all her years of managing formal state functions, she had never seen such spontaneous dedication and creativity. The scene below was chaotic and unconventional, but it was also beautiful in its authenticity. Alexander pressed his face to the glass, watching as the head gardener directed the placement of a makeshift stage where the court musicians could perform. "They're doing all this for me?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "They're doing it because they love you," Isabella replied. "Because they believe in the kind of king you'll become." For the first time that day, Alexander smiled. It wasn't the formal, practiced smile he had perfected for public appearances, but a genuine expression of joy and gratitude. "Can we help them?" "I want to be part of making this work." Isabella nodded, feeling a surge of pride in her son. This wasn't the birthday celebration they had planned, but it was already proving to be something more meaningful than any elaborate ballroom affair could have been. As they headed downstairs to join the staff in their preparations, Isabella's mind was already working on how to address the other challenges of the day. The decorations were being handled, and the kitchen crisis was being creatively solved. But there was still the matter of King Edward's absence, and the political implications of such an unconventional royal celebration. "Mother," Alexander said as they reached the main floor, "do you think Father will be disappointed that we changed everything?" Isabella paused, considering how to answer honestly without damaging her son's relationship with his father. "Your father will have to understand that sometimes the most important leadership happens when plans don't go as expected. Today, you're learning to adapt, to work with others, and to find joy even when circumstances are difficult. Those are lessons no traditional ceremony could have taught you." As they stepped into the courtyard, the staff members stopped their work and turned toward them. For a moment, Isabella worried they might feel embarrassed about taking such liberties with royal protocol. Instead, she saw faces filled with anticipation and hope. Chef Henri stepped forward, flour dusting his apron and sweat beading on his forehead. "Your Majesty, Your Highness, we hope you don't mind the liberties we've taken. We know how important today is, and we couldn't bear the thought of anything spoiling it." Alexander looked at his mother, then back at the chef. In that moment, Isabella saw her son make his first real decision as a future king. He straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and spoke with authority and warmth. "Chef Henri, all of you," Alexander said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "You've shown me what true loyalty and creativity look like. This celebration will be more memorable and meaningful than anything we could have planned in the ballroom. Thank you for teaching me that the best leadership comes from working together, not from sitting apart." The staff erupted in cheers and applause, and Isabella felt a surge of maternal pride so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. Whatever challenges the rest of the day might bring, she knew that Alexander was already becoming the kind of leader the kingdom needed. As the preparations continued around them, Isabella began to realize that this unexpected turn of events might be exactly what their family needed. The perfect facade they usually maintained had been stripped away, revealing something more authentic and powerful underneath. But there were still hours to go before the guests arrived, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the day's biggest challenges were yet to come. By noon, the courtyard had been transformed into something magical. The ancient stone walls of Avalon Palace provided a dramatic backdrop for the flowing white fabric that the seamstresses had draped between the oak trees. The gardeners had created intimate seating areas using ornate benches and cushions borrowed from the palace sitting rooms. Strings of golden lights hung overhead, waiting for evening to reveal their full beauty. Isabella stood on the palace steps, surveying the scene with a mixture of admiration and anxiety. The staff had performed miracles, but she couldn't shake her worry about how the guests would react to such an informal setting. Many of the attendees had traveled from distant kingdoms specifically for this traditional royal celebration. Would they see this outdoor arrangement as charming innovation, or as evidence of poor planning? "Your Majesty," Lady Margaret approached with a concerned expression. "I've just received word from the main gate. The first guests are beginning to arrive. But there's been another development." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. "What now?" "Princess Elena of Nordavia and her entourage are here. She arrived 2 hours early and is asking specifically about the gift presentation ceremony. She seems quite particular about protocol." Isabella groaned inwardly. Princess Elena was notorious throughout the royal circles for her rigid adherence to tradition and her sharp tongue when things didn't meet her exacting standards. She had once caused a diplomatic incident by publicly criticizing a state dinner's seating arrangements. "Where is she now?" Isabella asked, already knowing this conversation would require all her diplomatic skills. "In the blue drawing room. She's been asking repeatedly about the formal ballroom setup and seems confused by the activity in the courtyard." Isabella squared her shoulders, preparing for what could be a very delicate conversation. "Send word to Alexander and Charlotte. Tell them to stay with the staff preparations for now. I'll handle Princess Elena." The blue drawing room was one of the palace's most formal spaces, with its silk wallpaper, crystal chandeliers, and portraits of past monarchs gazing down from ornate frames. Princess Elena sat rigidly on the edge of a velvet armchair, her silver hair perfectly arranged beneath a small crown, her ice blue gown immaculate despite her journey. "Princess Elena," Isabella said, offering her most gracious smile as she entered. "What an honor to have you here for Alexander's celebration. I trust your journey was comfortable?" Elena's pale eyes studied Isabella with calculating intensity. "Queen Isabella. Yes, the journey was adequate. However, I must confess some confusion about today's arrangements. I was expecting to review the formal proceedings, but your staff seems to be setting up some sort of outdoor festival in the courtyard." Isabella settled into the chair across from Elena, choosing her words carefully. "We've made some adjustments to the original plans. I believe you'll find today's celebration offers a unique perspective on our family and our kingdom." "Adjustments?" Elena's eyebrow arched in a way that Isabella recognized as dangerous. "Queen Isabella, this is your son's 16th birthday. His official entry into royal responsibilities. Surely you understand the importance of maintaining proper dignity and tradition on such an occasion?" Before Isabella could respond, the sound of laughter drifted through the open window, from the courtyard below. Through the glass, they could see Alexander working alongside the gardeners, his sleeves rolled up as he helped arrange flowering bushes. Charlotte was directing a group of younger staff members in hanging paper lanterns, her face bright with joy. Elena followed Isabella's gaze, and her expression grew even more disapproving. "Your Majesty, is that Prince Alexander engaged in manual labor? On his birthday? What will people think?" Isabella felt a flash of anger, but kept her voice level. "They'll think he's learning to lead by example. That he understands the value of working with his people, rather than simply commanding them. That's a rather unconventional view of royal responsibility," Elena replied coolly. "In Nordavia, we believe that maintaining the proper distance and dignity is essential for effective leadership. The people need to look up to their rulers, not see them as common laborers." At that moment, Alexander's laughter rang out clearly from below as one of the gardeners told him a joke while they worked. The sound was genuine and infectious, and Isabella could see some of Elena's rigid composure crack slightly. "Princess Elena," Isabella said, leaning forward slightly, "may I ask you something personal? When you think back to your own childhood, what memories of your parents bring you the most joy?" Elena's expression flickered with surprise at the unexpected question. "I'm not sure I understand the relevance." "Humor me," Isabella pressed gently. "What moments made you feel most loved and valued by your family?" For a long moment, Elena was silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. There was a summer when I was perhaps 10 years old. My father, the king, took me fishing at the royal lake, just the two of us. With no guards or attendants, we talked about everything and nothing, and he taught me to bait my own hook. She paused, seemingly surprised by her own admission. It was terribly undignified, but it was the day I felt closest to him. Isabella nodded knowingly. Today, Alexander is creating those kinds of memories with the people who serve our family. He's learning that real leadership isn't about maintaining distance. It's about building connections. The staff out there aren't just employees to him anymore. They're allies, friends, people who will support him when he becomes king because they know he values them. Elena was quiet, watching the activity below with new eyes. But the other guests, the dignitaries and nobles, they won't understand this approach. Some won't, Isabella admitted, but those who matter will see something remarkable happening. They'll see a young prince who isn't afraid to get his hands dirty, who treats everyone with respect, and who finds joy in simple moments. Those are the qualities that make a great king. Before Elena could respond, excited voices echoed from the courtyard. Through the window, they could see a commotion near the main gate. A familiar figure was striding across the cobblestones, his fishing gear abandoned, his face dark with anger. King Edward had returned. Isabella's stomach dropped as she watched her husband survey the scene. Even from a distance, she could see his displeasure in the rigid set of his shoulders and his sharp gestures as he questioned the staff. This was exactly what she had feared. "If you'll excuse me, Princess Elena," Isabella said, rising quickly. "I need to speak with my husband." By the time Isabella reached the courtyard, Edward was in the middle of a heated conversation with Chef Henri. His voice carried across the space, causing several staff members to stop their work and stare. "What is the meaning of this chaos?" Edward demanded. "Where are the formal decorations? Why is my son dressed like a stable hand? This is completely unacceptable." Alexander, who had been laughing moments before, now stood frozen beside a half-arranged flower display. His face had gone pale, and Isabella could see the confidence he had been building all morning beginning to crumble. "Edward," Isabella called out as she approached, trying to keep her own voice calm and controlled. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately?" Perhaps we could discuss this privately? But Edward was beyond diplomatic discretion. Privately? "Isabella, in less than 2 hours, the most important people in the kingdom will be arriving to celebrate our son's birthday. And they're going to find him playing gardener in what looks like a village festival." The courtyard had gone completely silent now. Every staff member, every servant, every person who had worked so hard to create something beautiful was watching this confrontation unfold. Isabella could see the hurt and embarrassment in their faces, and her anger began to override her diplomatic instincts. Alexander stepped forward, his young voice barely steady. "Father, I can explain." "You shouldn't have to explain anything," Edward snapped. "This is your mother's responsibility, and she has clearly lost sight of what's appropriate for a royal celebration." That was the moment Isabella's careful control finally broke. She had managed crises, disasters, and diplomatic emergencies with grace and composure. But watching her husband humiliate their son and the loyal staff who had given their all to save this day was more than she could bear. "Enough," Isabella said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Edward, you left this morning to go fishing while your son's birthday preparations fell apart around us. These people, these wonderful, dedicated people, have spent their day creating something magical because they love Alexander and believe in his future as their king, and you dare to stand here and criticize their efforts?" Edward's eyes flashed with anger. "I am the king, Isabella. It is not my job to manage party planning. That's your domain, and it's not your job to tear down what others have built in love and dedication," Isabella shot back. "Look around you, Edward. Really look. See what's been accomplished here. See the joy on your son's face. Or at least the joy that was there before you arrived, and crushed it with your selfishness." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander stood between his parents, his face a mask of misery. Charlotte had appeared from somewhere and was gripping his arm, her own eyes wide with distress. The staff remained motionless, caught in the middle of a royal family crisis they never should have witnessed. It was Princess Elena who broke the silence. She had followed Isabella from the drawing room and now stepped into the courtyard, her regal presence commanding attention despite her small stature. "Your Majesties," she said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of royal experience. "If I may observe something as a guest and a friend?" Both Isabella and Edward turned to her, their anger temporarily suspended by surprise. "I have attended countless royal celebrations across many kingdoms," Elena continued, her gaze moving across the transformed courtyard. "I have seen elaborate ballrooms, priceless decorations, and ceremonies that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. But in all my years, I have never seen anything quite like what has been created here today." She walked slowly to where Alexander stood, her expression gentler than Isabella had ever seen it. "Your Highness, may I ask you something? How do you feel about the people who worked to create this celebration for you?" Alexander glanced nervously at his father before answering. "They're amazing, Your Highness. They didn't have to do any of this. But they did it anyway because they wanted my birthday to be special. They made me feel like I was part of something important, not just someone giving orders from above." Elena nodded approvingly. "And that feeling, young prince, is worth more than all the golden chandeliers in the world. A king who inspires that kind of devotion from his people is a king who will change the world." She turned back to Edward and Isabella, her voice taking on a firmer tone. "Your Majesties, your son has learned something today that cannot be taught in any classroom or ceremony. He has learned that true leadership comes from the heart, not from protocol books. You should be proud." Edward looked around the courtyard again, but this time, Isabella could see him truly taking in what had been accomplished. The creative problem-solving, the teamwork, the genuine affection between Alexander and the staff. Slowly, his rigid anger began to give way to something more complex. He began, then stopped. For a moment, the great King Edward looked lost and uncertain. "I was so worried about how things would look to our guests that I never considered how they would feel to our son." Alexander stepped toward his father cautiously. "I wanted you to be proud of me today, father. I wanted everything to be perfect because I knew how important this birthday was supposed to be." Edward's face crumpled slightly. "You have nothing to prove to me, Alexander. I should have been here to support you, not criticizing the people who stepped up when I failed." He turned to address the gathered staff, his voice carrying a humility Isabella rarely heard from him. "I owe all of you an apology. You showed more loyalty and creativity in one morning than I showed in abandoning my responsibilities. Thank you for caring about my son." Chef Henri stepped forward, his face flushed but determined. "Your Majesty, if you'd like, we could still set up something more traditional in the ballroom. We have enough time." "No," Edward said firmly, surprising everyone. "This is perfect exactly as it is. In fact, if you'll have me, I'd like to help with the final preparations." The transformation in the courtyard's atmosphere was immediate and profound. The tension melted away as Edward rolled up his sleeves and joined his family in the preparations. Isabella watched as he and Alexander worked side by side, arranging chairs and discussing the evening's schedule with an ease she hadn't seen between them in years. As the afternoon wore on and the first official guests began to arrive, Isabella realized that this chaotic, imperfect, beautiful day had given their family something more valuable than any traditional ceremony could have provided. It had given them authenticity, connection, and a story they would remember forever. But as the evening approached and more dignitaries arrived, Isabella knew the real test was still to come. How would the assembled nobility react to this unconventional celebration? And more importantly, how would Alexander handle the pressure of hosting such an important event in such an unusual setting? As the sun began to set behind the palace walls, the courtyard transformed once again. The golden lights strung between the oak trees flickered to life, casting warm shadows across the stone pathways. Candles appeared on every table, their flames dancing in the gentle evening breeze. The makeshift outdoor dining area had evolved into something that surpassed even Isabella's most optimistic expectations. The guests began arriving in earnest, as the dinner hour approached. Isabella stood at the entrance to the courtyard, greeting each dignitary personally and watching their reactions carefully. To her surprise and relief, most seemed charmed by the unconventional setting. The outdoor atmosphere encouraged conversation and mingling in a way that formal ballroom events rarely achieved. Duke Richard of Westmarch paused beside her, his weathered face creased in a genuine smile. "Your Majesty, I must say this is refreshingly different. My grandson would be green with envy if he knew I was dining under the stars at a royal celebration." "Thank you, Your Grace," Isabella replied, feeling some of her anxiety begin to ease. "We hoped to create something memorable." "Oh, it's memorable, all right," chuckled Countess Margaret of Thornfield as she joined them. "I was just telling my husband that this feels more like a celebration and less like a diplomatic obligation. Your son looks absolutely radiant." Isabella followed the Countess's gaze to where Alexander was moving between the tables, greeting guests with natural warmth and enthusiasm. He had changed into formal attire, but his earlier experiences working with the staff had given him a confidence and authenticity that no amount of royal training could have provided. When he laughed at Lord Hamilton's jokes or listened intently to Ambassador Chen's stories about her homeland, it was clear that he was genuinely engaged rather than simply performing his duties. "He's learned something important today," Isabella murmured, more to herself than to her companions. "What's that, my dear?" asked the Countess. "That being royal isn't about perfection or distance. It's about connection and service." As if summoned by her words, Alexander appeared at her side. "Mother, Chef Henri says dinner will be ready in 15 minutes. Should I gather everyone?" Before Isabella could answer, a commotion near the courtyard entrance caught their attention. A young man in the uniform of a royal messenger was hurrying toward them, his face urgent with news. "Your Majesties," he called out, slightly breathless from his rush. "I bring word from the capital. There's been an emergency session of Parliament called for tomorrow morning. The Prime Minister requests King Edward's immediate return." Isabella felt her heart sink. Political emergencies always seem to strike at the worst possible moments. She glanced at Edward, who was across the courtyard speaking with some military advisors, and saw the familiar tension already creeping into his posture as he received the message. "What kind of emergency?" Alexander asked, his voice betraying none of the anxiety Isabella felt. "A trade dispute with the Northern Confederation has escalated, Your Highness. There are reports of ships being detained and threats of economic sanctions. The Prime Minister believes immediate royal intervention may be necessary." Isabella watched as Edward made his way toward them through the crowd of guests. His face was grim, and she could already see him calculating travel times and political implications. This was exactly the kind of crisis that had pulled him away from family moments countless times before. "I have to leave," Edward said as he reached them, confirming Isabella's fears. "The situation could affect thousands of jobs across the kingdom. I'm sorry, Alexander, but I need to be in the capital by midnight." For a moment, Alexander's face fell. This was his moment, his special day. And once again, royal duties were threatening to overshadow family time. But then, something remarkable happened. Instead of disappointment, Isabella saw determination cross her son's features. "Father," Alexander said, placing a hand on Edward's arm, "you've already given me something more valuable than your presence at dinner. You've shown me that sometimes leadership means making difficult choices, even when they hurt personally." Edward stared at his son in surprise. "Alexander, you've also shown me that it's never too late to admit when you've made a mistake and to make things right," Alexander continued. "And most importantly, you've taught me that the best leaders surround themselves with people they can trust, so that when they can't be everywhere at once, they know things will be handled well." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes as she watched this exchange. Her 16-year-old son was demonstrating wisdom that many adults never achieved. "I want you to go handle this crisis," Alexander said firmly. "But I want you to know that everything you've taught me, everything we've learned together today, will be here when you get back. The kingdom needs you now, and this family supports that." Edward pulled his son into a fierce embrace. "When did you become so wise?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. I had good teachers, Alexander replied, glancing meaningfully at Isabella and then toward the staff members who were putting finishing touches on the dinner preparations. As Edward departed, promising to return as soon as possible, Isabella felt a mixture of pride and sadness. But as she looked around the courtyard filled with guests, enjoying themselves in the warm evening air, she realized that this unconventional day had given them something unexpected and precious. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander called out, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard, "if I could have your attention for just a moment." The conversations gradually quieted as guests turned toward the young prince. He stood on the makeshift stage that the staff had constructed, looking every inch a future king despite the informal setting. "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, to celebrate with me," he began, his voice steady and warm. "This birthday hasn't gone at all the way we planned it, and I think that's made it perfect." Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. "Today I learned that real leadership isn't about having everything under control. It's about working with amazing people to find creative solutions when things go wrong. It's about recognizing that the people who serve alongside you aren't just employees or subjects, they're partners in building something meaningful." Isabella watched as the staff members around the edges of the courtyard straightened with pride at Alexander's words. "I also learned that family isn't just about being together for the easy moments," Alexander continued, his voice growing stronger. "It's about supporting each other through challenges, forgiving each other's mistakes, and celebrating the love that holds us together even when we're apart." He paused, looking directly at Isabella. "My mother taught me that grace under pressure isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about facing problems honestly and finding ways to make them into opportunities." The crowd erupted in applause, and Isabella felt her chest swell with maternal pride. "And my father taught me that sometimes the most important leadership happens when you admit you were wrong, apologize sincerely, and then work to do better," Alexander added. "He also taught me that serving your people sometimes means making personal sacrifices, even when it breaks your heart." The applause grew even louder, and Isabella noticed that several of the older dignitaries were wiping their eyes. "So tonight, as we dine under the stars in this beautiful space that was created through teamwork and creativity, I want to propose a toast," Alexander said, raising his glass. "To the kind of leadership that brings people together, instead of keeping them apart. To families that grow stronger through challenges. And to all of you, who have shown me that the best celebrations come from the heart, not from a planning committee." As the guests raised their glasses in response, Isabella felt a profound sense of completeness. This day had tested every aspect of their family dynamics, their leadership abilities, and their capacity for growth. They had all been found equal to the challenge. Dinner was served as the stars appeared overhead, and the conversations flowed with an ease that Isabella had rarely experienced at royal events. The outdoor setting seemed to break down the usual formalities, encouraging genuine connections between guests who might normally maintain polite distance. Princess Elena, who had remained for the celebration despite Isabella's earlier fears, approached during the main course. "Queen Isabella, I owe you an apology. When I arrived today, I was prepared to criticize what I assumed would be poor planning. Instead, I've witnessed something extraordinary. Thank you, Princess Elena. Your support today meant more than you know." "That young man," Elena said, nodding toward Alexander, who was deep in conversation with a group of young nobles, "will be a remarkable king. Not because he follows protocol perfectly, but because he understands that real authority comes from earning respect, not demanding it." As the evening wore on, Isabella found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. Charlotte was regaling a table of dignitaries with stories about her riding adventures, her natural charm, winning over even the most serious politicians. Alexander moved effortlessly between groups, showing genuine interest in everyone from the oldest ambassador to the youngest page. The staff, who had worked so hard to make the day successful, were clearly enjoying the recognition and appreciation they were receiving. Isabella watched Chef Henri beaming as guests complimented his creative outdoor menu, and saw the head gardener proudly explaining his impromptu decoration choices to fascinated visitors. As the evening drew toward its close and guests began to make their departures, many stopped to thank Isabella and Alexander personally. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with several dignitaries commenting that this had been the most enjoyable royal celebration they had ever attended. "Your Majesty," said Ambassador Chen as she prepared to leave, "I will be writing to my own queen about today's celebration, not because of the protocol innovations, but because of the leadership qualities I witnessed in Prince Alexander. Our kingdoms will be in good hands when his generation takes power." After the last guest had departed and the staff had begun the cleanup process, Isabella found herself alone with her children in the now quiet courtyard. The candles were still burning, casting flickering shadows across the tables laden with the remnants of a successful celebration. "Mother," Alexander said, settling into a chair beside her, "thank you for letting today become what it needed to become, instead of forcing it to be what we originally planned." Charlotte curled up in another chair, her formal dress wrinkled but her eyes bright with satisfaction. "It was the best party we've ever had," she declared. "Even better than my own birthday last year." Isabella laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Today taught me something important too," she admitted. "I spend so much time trying to control every detail, trying to make everything perfect, that I sometimes forget to leave room for magic to happen." "What kind of magic?" Charlotte asked sleepily. "The magic that comes when people work together with love and creativity. The magic of discovering that the best moments often come from the worst plans. The magic of watching your children become the kind of people you always hoped they would be." Alexander reached over and took his mother's hand. "Do you think Father will understand what happened here today when we tell him about it?" Isabella considered the question carefully. Edward's departure had been necessary, and his earlier behavior had been problematic. But his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and his pride in Alexander's growth showed that he was capable of learning and changing. "I think your father will understand that today we all learned something about what really matters," she said finally. "And I think he'll be proud that his son handled a crisis with such grace and wisdom." As they sat together in the candlelit courtyard, surrounded by the evidence of a day that had gone wonderfully wrong, Isabella realized that this birthday would indeed be remembered for years to come. Not because everything had gone according to plan, but because when everything had gone wrong, they had discovered something beautiful in the chaos. The lessons learned today about leadership, family, resilience, and authenticity would serve Alexander well throughout his life. More importantly, they had all learned that the strongest bonds are forged not in perfect moments, but in the times when people choose to support each other through difficulties. As the candles burned lower and the night grew quieter, Isabella knew that this 16th birthday had marked more than just Alexander's formal entry into royal responsibilities. It had marked the beginning of a new chapter for their entire family. One based on honesty, cooperation, and the understanding that true nobility comes not from maintaining perfect appearances, but from showing perfect heart. The day that had started with disaster had ended with discovery. The celebration that had threatened to be ruined had instead been transformed into something more meaningful than any traditional ceremony could have provided. And the young prince who had begun the day worried about living up to expectations had ended it by exceeding every expectation his parents had ever dared to hold. In the quiet of the courtyard, with her children beside her and the stars overhead, Queen Isabella smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities for growth. But tonight, surrounded by the lingering warmth of a celebration born from love and creativity, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together as a family strengthened by adversity and unified by the understanding that the best leadership, like the best love, comes from the heart.